Hey everyone, I'm Stephanie, and I believe that all readers should read children's literature, especially adults. So that's what we do on the KidLit Love podcast. We celebrate all things children's literature, picture books, early readers, middle grade, and young adult novels too. Whether you're an adult reading to your inner child or connecting the young readers in your lives with fantastic books, you've come to the right place. Each week, we'll talk to a different children's literature author and discuss their books, their hopes and dreams for readers, their writing process, and much, much more. So, grab a notebook to build your TBR, and let's get to today's episode of KidLit Love. Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the KidLit Love podcast. I'm Stephanie Affinito, your KidLit loving host, inviting you back to another bookish conversation with a children's literature author. Today, I'm talking with Amy Makechnie. Amy is the author of the critically acclaimed middle grade novels, The Unforgettable Guinevere St. Clair and 10,000 Tries, both of which received multiple starred reviews and have been on numerous state and best of lists. She's here today to talk about her newest release, The McNifficents. This middle grade novel tells the story of 6 rambunctious children and their nanny, who just so happens to be a very dignified miniature schnauzer. It's hilarious. I loved it, and readers will love it, and I can't wait to talk about it. So let's get right to it. Amy, welcome to the KidLit Love podcast. I'm so glad you're here today.
Thank you so much for having me. This is really fun.
Well, if you think this is really fun, your book was really fun. To read a book from the perspective of the dog who happens to be the nanny in a very fun, interesting, quirky family, it put a smile on my face the whole time I read it. So I'm so grateful that I get to talk to you about it today. But before we get to the book, I would love for you to give us a little bit about you. Can you tell us a little bit about your work, your journey to children's literature, and anything else you would want listeners to know about?
Sure, thank you. I've always loved reading and not necessarily writing, but I did always love books. We spent a lot of my childhood surrounded by books. My mother's the best storyteller I know. We went to the library every Saturday, and it was an amazing thing that I could leave the library with a stack of books that were free. And I've carried that into my adulthood for sure. I had a really hard time choosing a major. Nobody ever told me you are a terrific writer, except maybe my dad, because he loved when I wrote letters home. And I really wanted to train athletes. And so I went, even though I was probably better in in the reading realm and the English humanities area, I went into science so that I could work with athletes and was a science major, which surprised my family since I was so averse to math and science. But I learned a lot of things that you can try 10,000 times, and you can learn you can learn just about anything and become good at it. I minored in English and taught science, have 4 kids, and I always still love to write. And really it felt like one day my youngest, she's now a senior in high school, she was a newborn, and I had this story that I just had to get down on paper. And the more I started writing it, the more I thought, I wonder if this is something. And I just kept going with it. And um, discovered something that I really love to do. I was blogging along the way, so I knew I did like to write. And blogging was a really good, maybe soft launch into putting content into the world. Um, and just the schedule of writing, the daily discipline of it. Um, I never really thought about writing fiction, but that first story really kind of was this glorified autobiography, which morphed into a more fictional story, which has never been published, which I think that's very common for first novels.
Say, I've heard that one or two or three times on this podcast.
Yeah, and again, I think you have to learn how to do it. I didn't know how to write a book,
Yeah.
and, learning to read with kind of this eye towards writing and why does this book work? Why do I love this book so much? Um, and yeah, my first 2 books, my first book, The Unforgettable Guinevere St. Clair, I wrote it for adults, but the market was really hot for middle grade. It was kind of coming off the heels of Wonder, and my protagonist is 11, and I had a reader friend say, Amy, I think if you made this middle grade, it could be really something. And as soon as I did that, I started getting agent interest. And I kind of feel like I found my voice there. I really love the middle grade space.
Yeah. There's just something special about that age, that
Yeah.
genre. There's all sorts of things going on, right? All sorts of things happen to middle grade characters that they're working through and growing through. But there's this still childlike, yet not childlike hope and resilience and all just it's just such a wonderful genre, a wonderful
Yeah.
age group to write in. But I do find it fascinating that it originally was for adults. How did you go about making that transformation?
It was definitely hard. I mean, I probably had to cut like 30,000 words because,
Yeah.
the adult I'm aiming for about 80,000 words, and I needed to get it down between 40 and 50. Um, I had to cut characters, I had to cut a lot of brain stuff, and it's a story about, a girl whose mother lost consciousness, and this is all based on a true story, so I think, every one of my ideas is based on something that is true that I'm really fascinated by. And when this mom woke up, she didn't remember anything after the age of 13. And my mother went to a physical therapist. His name was James, and his wife was Laura, who was the one suffering from this brain injury. So
Wow.
every time she went to physical therapy, I would say, "What's going on with Laura?" And I would get this update over years and years. And I thought that the story, just that story, seemed too sad. But I thought, what would it be like if I wrote from the perspective of the child who was literally forgotten? The brain just couldn't remember. Which is it's a nice this wasn't the original title. But it's better now. The Unforgettable Guinevere St. Clair is a nice, kind of nod to being remembered.
I have to go buy this as soon as our call is done.
Okay, well, I hope you will. And I'll tell you something really fun is it just got optioned this year for a series. And it might not ever get, made, which most novels don't, but that's gonna definitely be a life highlight.
Wow, a good holiday
Good
present,
holiday.
at least at the time of the recording.
Yes.
That's wonderful. And it sounds, number one, it sounds amazing. Just the little elevator pitch that you gave truly hooked me. But now knowing how it completely morphed and changed, I can appreciate it even
Yeah.
more.
Yeah.
So yes, I'm reading your books out of order, and that will
That's
be
okay.
our next one now.
Well, thank you for reading. And fiction is so fun too because you take things that are true and then I like to say when I'm with an audience, I'll say, and then you just lie and everyone thinks that's funny, but it's true. You take things
Yeah.
and then you change them into, truth can definitely be stranger than fiction, but fiction is so fun because you can just make things up.
Right. Which leads us a little bit to the book that we are talking about today, which is the Magnificents, which does have, a little bit of imagination and things that are made up in it. So I already gave a quick preview at the top of the episode that this book tells the story of six very rambunctious siblings with all sorts of personalities, their mom and dad, who have very different personalities too. And the best part is that it is told from the perspective of the nanny, who happens to be that very dignified miniature schnauzer. So, what is the inspiration behind this? Like, and now I'm wondering, where's the kernel of truth? And then where did that go?
Honestly, I don't even have that big of imagination. I so much is taken from real life. So I really did have we did have a dog named Lord Tennyson, and we thought it was so funny because miniature schnauzers look very dignified. The haircut that we give them is these big bushy eyebrows. They look very intelligent. They are very intelligent, and then the goatee. And my children were constantly dressing him up and putting bonnets on his head and putting him in strollers and pushing him up the hill. And also, like my youngest would say, Tenny is my best friend. And it's so sweet. It's so sweet to see how much your children love their dogs. And I started to think about how, they're always hauling him around and like, what is his perspective on all this? And this started to just turn into this idea of what if Lord Tennyson, and we called him Tenny, but what if he thought that he was responsible for taking care of these children? And let's just add two more to make it more chaotic. And let's have the parents be a little more absent.
Mhm.
And it was difficult because at first I had it all from the point of view of the kids, then alternating points of view from kids and dog. And then my editor said, I think it'd be better, Amy, if the whole thing was point of view of the dog. And that was so hard for me because I don't know exactly what that point of view is,
Right,
and they can't talk.
right. How
And
do you
so
research
all
that?
right. So all of the dialogue in his head, it's internal. And how does he communicate with the kids? And so that became all of like nodding and pulling on their clothes and shaking his head. And it was challenging and also really, really fun. Or
That
even can he talk to other animals? Like, I don't know.
Right. Right. But you get to make it up, right?
I
That's
get to
that's
make
the
it
fun
up.
of fiction. I think that was probably one of my favorite parts of the book was you mentioning his communication and how he communicates. I have 5 dogs. I am
Oh,
a big dog lover. I didn't really want 5, but here they are. They all needed us in some way. And so going into this as someone who has often thought, what are you thinking? Right.
yeah.
Right. When our big Great Dane is all passed out, sleeping on the couch, and I just decide to use her as a human pillow, and she opens that one eye and stares at me, what are you thinking? Or when one of my sons, who, 17 and 20, will still run around and wrestle with them and play as if they were still 10 years old. And I think, what do they want to tell them right now? So I went into this all in for this. I am going to get this dog perspective. And I loved how with the lift of an eyebrow
Mm,
or the quiet stare or the way that the dog is kind of sitting or positioning communicated as if he really were the nanny in charge. And the kids would reply to him like, oh, I'm going to put you in the closet so you can't stare at me and I can
right.
feel, the babysitter, coming down at me. So that was something I wanted to ask is how you went about doing that. But it sounds like you thought about it, you had some fun. And it seems like the theme of significant revision from one draft to the other is a theme for you, at least in these 2 books.
So much. I wish I could be the writer. Maybe there's no such thing as this writer who can just write the story. But mine always need major, major overhauls, and this was one of them.
Yeah. Oh,
And
well,
I think it's a better book. I think
right.
both times I'm grateful to have an editor.
Yeah. Yeah. So now we've got Lord Tennyson. Let's talk about the kiddos. There are 6 very fun, interesting kiddos who have, I would say, some typical sibling relationships. There are things like found keys and red diaries and I don't like to give too many spoilers, but things siblings do that might cause the other sibling to be quite upset. I grew up as an only child for a while. I didn't have my brothers come along until I was 10 and 13. And so I had no idea how this world of sibling relationships worked
Mhm.
until I became a mom and I had a 2-year-old and twins, brand
Oh,
new
wow.
twins. And then I was like, what is happening? They go through these ups and downs and I have no idea. So you mentioned you have 4 kids?
I have 4 kids.
You have 4. And so I have to ask, are any of these characters loosely based on your own children?
So much. So, so much. In fact, so this is the first book of mine that has interior sketches, so it's really fun to see what the illustrator how she saw the children. And so like even this very first interior sketch, it's we have this little baby Sweetum. She's 18 months old, and this was so much modeled on my sweet, sweet now 20-year-old who was very, very cute and very mouthy and mischievous. She would say things where I would think, where could you possibly have heard that? That why is that coming out of your mouth? And um so yes, absolutely. Like even this first story, she was so cute and she toddles over to a woman on the beach and she has her hands full of sand and the woman opens her eyes and she drops it in her eyes because isn't that fun? And I knew when that happened, oh, this is my first chapter. And
Yeah.
I was, constantly grabbing stories from real life. Naughty
Oh,
Mary
oh,
is
so do you mean that was a real life story?
that is a
The
real
dropping
story. Yeah.
in real.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh.
Naughty Mary is actually my mother. Like that whole dynamic is my mother. The diary, the fence. I hope this is piquing your interest if you're listening.
Yes,
My mother
especially the
did
fence.
that.
Really?
She did that. She read the diary and painted the words on the fence.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. And
I
my mother, I mean, she taught us right from wrong. And when you hear about her childhood, you're like,
Yeah.
Mom,
Yeah. Well, she was young.
she was young.
That makes it even more special to think of the events in the book and how they unfold because right from that first chapter where there's a little bit of chaos on the beach, it goes from, chaotic thing to fun chaotic thing, whether it's
Yeah,
getting
yeah,
chickens or riding bikes or whatever it is, there is always something going on and there is always something that Tenny is trying to wrangle in and control and which I loved kind of like a nanny would and I'm thinking is it Mary Poppins, is it Super Nanny, like who is it trying to teach them how to become slightly more controlled, self-regulated, responsible humans so that they don't bring in someone
mm,
else on top of Lord Tennyson. Like
yes,
he
yeah.
wants to be the one to help this family come together and grow together. And so I just thought that was such a wonderful piece that you could see him trying to do and wondering how in the world was he going to do that with this very interesting family.
Thank you. Thank you. And it was hard because even the dog has to have this story arc and he has to change. And the kids do too. And there were a lot of characters, and that was definitely challenging to balance all of the kids and a dog changing somewhat. So you have this satisfying conclusion.
Yeah, and I've said, the word chaotic and rambunctious a couple of times because it is a fun, boisterous family, but there is so much love
Oh,
throughout
I'm
the
glad you said
pages.
that.
Yeah. Even though there's sneaky diary reading and perhaps a little revenge in there, it is just filled and wrapped with love. Yes.
I am glad to hear that. I didn't want them to just come across as like mean. I wanted there to be love. So I'm glad you said that.
Yeah. I told my kids, even though my kids are older now, I thought, this idea of a sibling council, which I loved, up high in the tree house or the tree fort, the sibling council to come together. I thought, what a neat thing that some kids could take away and actually bring to their own chaotic families.
Which my children did because my oldest read the Penderwicks, and they have these meetings, and my daughter, the eldest, who liked to be in charge of the meetings, really liked that idea. And it was mostly to make announcements of what she wanted her siblings to do. But I thought I would go with that one too.
Yeah. So is she Annie?
She- She's very much Annie.
She's very- I love now being able to, team up your real life mentions of your family with these characters.
The chickens, true story. I mean, just there's so much that I just grabbed and yeah, wove into a story.
Readers are going to have fun. Like this is a book that is just fun from the first page to the last. There's a lot of laughing. There's a lot of, oh my gosh, what's going to happen? The chickens were probably some of my favorites because he has great restraint for a while.
It's so hard to be a dog when there's a bird.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Readers will just settle in, have a really fun story. And as I mentioned, there is so much love in the family and seeing how all of them change just a little bit toward each other at the end. It was just a nice, I don't give spoilers, but it was a nice little satisfying
Oh,
ending.
good.
Just,
I am so glad to hear.
yeah. Yeah. Middle grade readers are definitely going to love it. Dog lovers are going to love it. And I think I just loved it as a parent too, because I thought, I want to be Honey. And
All
I
right.
just go in my garden. And I just want the dog to take care of things. I just loved the dynamic between Honey and Mr. Magnificent, who have very different parenting styles and levels of ease and stress. And so I really got a kick out of that as an adult as well. And I
Oh,
thought,
good.
how fun to imagine one of my five dogs, as perhaps considering themselves the nanny of
Hmm.
the family. And I definitely have one. I have a golden or a labradoodle. Well, I have a golden doodle, but the labradoodle named Coco, I think he would be my Lord Tennyson.
Oh, that's so fun. Five dogs. That's amazing.
Yeah, it's
That
it's
could definitely be a story.
it could be a story. I think it's our house is just as chaotic as the Magnificents, but because of the
Yeah.
dogs instead of the children. But
Yeah, it's gotta be.
it's good. Like I said, they all needed us in some way. And so now we just are
That's right. Just more
happy.
to love.
Yes. So I've so enjoyed talking about this book, but I'd love to ask if there are things that you are working on now that perhaps you could tease us about in the future.
I would love to write four Magnificent books. I would love to have that be a series. This one is in the summer. I would love to have maybe the fall one, the fall of Lord Tennyson, and maybe a winter one and a spring, and maybe the fall one he goes to school with the kids. And everything with publishing is based on sales, and
Right.
middle grade is really hard right now. So we'll see, we'll see if I can sell that book. Um, my next middle grade is a little bit older, and I'm actually curious where it's going to land, if it's going to be young adult or upper middle grade. So it's in that space where it's kind of hard for publishers as well, but it's a 13-year-old girl who goes to boarding school, and it's a boarding school mystery, and she is looking for her father. And I'm almost done with, this is probably the third draft. And I'm going to turn it into my editor in January, and fingers crossed we sell
Yay.
it.
Yay. I'm glad to hear about that age group because I have found in my own experience of reading children's literature and more importantly, recommending it
Hmm.
to the kids around me, I can find very clear, I guess, lines in the sand, if you will, for early chapter books and then a clear middle grade. But the middle grade can often be a really large jump to
Yeah.
YA. And I really do think there needs to be that upper middle grade or young adult. So I
Yeah.
feel like that could be a nice age group that isn't I don't want to say underserved, but I don't feel like there's as many there to help kids who aren't ready to go to YA, but are ready to move on a little bit in terms of those topics. So that's
Yeah.
exciting. I will cross my fingers with you.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, it is tricky. I mean, kids tend to read up, but I think publishers have a hard time thinking, okay, where do we market this book? Like my first two books are definitely upper middle grade. McNifficents is still considered middle grade, but you can be reading this kindergarten first. You could read up to eighth grade, but it's definitely that sweet spot is probably third to fifth.
Yeah.
Whereas the sweet spot for my first two are probably like fifth through eighth,
Yeah.
and it's all middle grade. So yes, that underserved upper middle school age is a grade I really love to write for, but it seems to be a harder sell.
Yeah. Hearing you talk about those different age levels, I think too, I could really imagine reading The Magnificents as a read aloud over time, a chapter
Mm.
book read aloud in an earlier grade. They would just be hanging at some of those cliffhangers that happen at the end of the chapters, and then getting that sneak peek with that little kind of peekaboo illustration that comes at the beginning of the chapters. So listeners, this is a book for adults, of course, because that's what I believe all children's literature is. It's a book for middle grade, but I think it'd be a really fun chapter book read aloud in the classroom too. I'm
Thank
glad
you.
you mentioned that.
Thank you.
So, where can listeners find you online if they want to learn more about you and your books and follow along as we see what comes in 2025?
I have a website, amymckechnie.com. I have a Substack newsletter that's amymckechnie.substack.com. And if you subscribe to that one, I send out a post every Tuesday morning. And I'm on Instagram. It's at Amy Makechnie. And those are the major places. I've tried to cut back. I actually did try TikTok, and I'm so bad at it. And that's probably my target age group. Maybe 2025 will take me more into TikTok, but those other three places are definitely where I'm hanging out the most.
Yeah. There's so many places that we could
Oh,
go. I think
yeah.
it can be so overwhelming. But I am glad you mentioned your Substack because I'm there and I love those posts. So
Thank you.
I know Substack is becoming a really wonderful platform where I think readers, writers, they can find that authentic connection that we used to find on social media channels with some really wonderful writing. So I will be sure to put links to your website and Instagram and especially a direct link to your Substack in the show notes as well.
Thank you so much.
Welcome. Thank you so much for coming to talk about this really fun book today. I
Thank you for
enjoyed
having
it.
me.
Yeah, I loved it and I can't wait to see what's coming in 2025 for you. So keep in touch and doors always open when new books come out if you ever want to come back.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And listeners, thank you for listening to another episode of KidLit Love, and I will see you in the next one. Thanks for listening to today's episode of the KidLit Love podcast. You'll find links to all the books, resources, and ideas mentioned in the show notes at alitlife.com. And if you want more, you might like to listen to my other podcast called Get Literate. It's a podcast that explores all things books and reading, notebooks and writing, and everything in between to build a life you love. One more thing. If you love what you listened to today, please take a moment to rate and review the podcast or take a screenshot of the episode and text it to a bookish friend. This helps the podcast grow and builds our bookish community of KidLit Love. Thanks for listening.